We always look to avail ourselves of the opportunity to spend some time with John Tillman, CEO, Illinois Policy Institute, taking time out of his morning for us. John, good morning to you.
Good morning. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you as well. How's everything going this morning?
Things are good. It's it's wet but not drenching, and I'm hoping for a good weekend. To think about how we're going to pay off our pension debt.
Oh, can't we push that off for about 2 minutes and talk about the right to work vote yesterday? But we do have a lot of pension questions. But this was a more of a stunt, I would say, by Mike Madigan to embarrass the governor and Republicans on the issue. My point is this: I look at the Tribune headline today, John, and it says Madigan sends Rauner message on anti-union right-to-work proposal. Somehow the media covering Springfield have decided, and now it has deemed, that a bill simply to give workers the freedom to choose whether or not to be in a union is ipso facto anti-union.
This is this is just a great point. One of the great challenges we face in Illinois is that the punditry class and the media class who gives information to the public to inform the public does not do it in a balanced way. This bill, Rauner's proposal, is, first of all, to give control to local municipalities, let them decide what's in their own best interest, as opposed to have it come dictated by Springfield. And remember, it's Springfield who created our entire crisis we're all living through. And secondly, an honest debate is whether or not an individual should be forced into a union and all that's attendant to that, or whether the union member should have control over their own destiny. The way I put this is that in the 1800s, the business bosses had all the control over individual workers, and that was wrong. In the 20th century, in the 1900s, that all shifted because of the very necessary work of the union movement to shift control back to workers and eventually to the union bosses. But now that pendulum has swung too far, where individual workers are forced into unions they may not want to join, who do political work they may not agree with. Our philosophy and the governor's philosophy is let's put the workers in charge. Let's let them decide if they want to be in a union or not. Let's let them decide who their business boss should be or not. And the unions don't want that. It's like joining a club. Once you're in, you can never get out, kind of like the Hotel California.
It would seem to me, and I've heard other people say the same thing, John, if it's appealing enough to join the union, regardless of what the private sector may offer, if it seems to be more reasonable for the worker and that worker's family, well, then the decision would be easy to make.
Exactly, and here's another example of what the unions always fight for. They hate the idea of annual recertification. Now think about all the things you join. Everything you join in your life, whether it's some sort of a fitness club, whether it's some sort of, if you're wealthy enough and affluent enough and work hard enough, maybe a country club or a club where your kid goes and plays sports, whatever it might be, you get control over that as to when you want to end that relationship. But in a union, once there's a certification vote, maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, and most of those people have retired, the worker that's hired tomorrow is still subject to that vote to have created that union and be forced into it. Our point is we have elections all the time around here. Why not have a recertification and let people decide? And the unions are terrified of that. And the reason they're terrified of that is that they know their own members will, in many cases, vote them out. And that means they're not serving their people well. Here's the dirty little secret. In states that have right to work, where individual workers have control of their destiny, union jobs are growing. Union membership is growing. And the reason is because the unions have to win over their own members and provide good service. In states where you're forced into the unions have no incentive to provide members with good service. They just take a chunk of your paycheck and may spend it on politics you don't like.
John Tillman with us, CEO of Illinois Policy, IllinoisPolicy.org. It's Riley and Scott on WROK. All right, pensions. John, before we get into some options and what might be done, let's make clear what the Supreme Court said last Friday. And that is that paying the pensions for people who no longer work for the state is the absolute number one priority of government in Springfield. Before public safety, education, helping poor, anything like that, the number one priority is paying these pensions. And in fact, in a footnote, the Supreme Court said they have the right and reserve it and might use it to force the Senate and the House to use general funds to actually pay pensions. Take money meant for education, public safety, and force the General Assembly to use it to pay pensions. Consequences be damned.
That is a frightening footnote, and that is a usurpation of power by this Supreme Court that is outrageous. What they're essentially saying is that the people of Illinois have no control over their destiny, that this court, these 7 individuals, have the power to confiscate funds that is taken by the coercive power of law put into the general revenue fund of the state and use it as they wish for their own pension. Remember, the Supreme Court, while it wasn't part of this case, is part of the system, for their own benefit at the expense of services to the poor, the most disadvantaged people, and at the expense of building roads and highways so people can get to work, at the expense of educating our children. That public employee pensions is the number one thing. Now, having said that, first of all, it's just a moral outrage on its face. The second thing, and then, by the way, it's a moral outrage in two ways. One, that they feel they have that authority to essentially take over the operating of the government. And secondly, that they think that is a right moral choice to allocate resources. Now, having said that, there is no question that there is a moral dilemma between how do we handle people who are in the pension system who were lied to by politicians. Politicians in Springfield who created this crisis. And the Supreme Court is saying the politicians created the crisis and we want to keep them in control. It's bizarre to me. I find the whole thing, it's like living in an alternative universe. But I don't think that people of Illinois are going to stand for it, and I do think there's going to be a brewing fight. And it's only once it gets to a brewing fight with some, frankly, anger and desperation on where resources go that we're going to see a solution.
And you'll hear people on the counter and say, well, what they're saying is, you've got it within the power, jack up the taxes, cover the difference. That's what it's all about. Then move on with state business.
That's the recommendation to follow the Detroit model, which was an unfolding and is an unfolding human tragedy for the people of Detroit. I went to school in Detroit. I lived in Detroit for several years in the 1980s. And anybody who lived through that or goes back as I do many times during the course of the year, I've been here 30 years now, the one example we should not follow is the Detroit example, and that is what that strategy would do.
John Tillman with us, Illinois Policy CEO. It's Riley and Scott on WROK. So at this point, after seeing what the Supreme Court said, from a policy perspective, what do you think is the clearest, cleanest way forward?
Well, I think the only way around this, first of all, Governor Rauner does not believe that, his team does not believe that in their public statements that this case means you cannot reform benefits prospectively, which means going forward. The whole argument has always been, can you reform benefits already earned and vested, or can you not do that, and can you reform benefits not yet earned? The governor is staying with the position that this case has nothing to do with benefits not yet earned. There are others who disagree with that, but our position has always been that. Our position has always been that current retirees should absolutely be protected. I think it would be wrong and unfair to current retirees to reduce their deal. I think that would be just, that would be equally immoral. And in terms of current workers, I've always felt it's very unfair to current workers, and this all gets lost because it's such an emotional issue for people in the system. But if you've been in the system and you left to go get another job and you're vested, that is protected, and that we should treat it the same way. Whatever the reforms are from this day going forward, that whatever you've earned through today should be treated just and protected just as your vesting is as if you left for another job. And then sign a new deal to continue to work for the state. That's what I've always thought should be done. Now, there is debate about whether the Supreme Court disallows that. Most people are saying it does, and Governor Rauner is saying it doesn't. But what's going to happen, and this is why I think the unions are going to regret this decision, essentially they've declared war on the people of Illinois. And so what is going to happen is there's going to be more and more tension between people in the private sector who fund all of this and people in the public sector who benefit from this. And it is a very unfair system to the private sector worker who is, at the whim of the economy with their own retirement, and then the Supreme Court says, plus we're going to take more of your money to make the system that is structurally unsound whole. It's just it's an outrage, and people are going to become very angry about that as they see that unfold.
John Tillman with us, IllinoisPolicy.org. It's Riley and Scott on WROK. From a policy perspective, and I guess from a legal perspective too, John, what about taking the pension money back on the back end, so to speak? The court says you can't prevent these payments from going out. What if lawmakers said, all right, if we can't stop you from these COLAs and we can't stop you from getting what we think is not going to be sustainable, could they then enact a tax on A, retirement savings, or perhaps B, simply on pension payments alone? What's the legality or the policy ramifications of possibly something like that?
Illinois is one of 3 states of the 41 states that have an income tax that does not tax retirement income. And we never advocate for higher taxes because the state has more than enough revenue to pay for core services. But it is an interesting strategy to say, okay, we're going to start taxing pension benefits with income taxes. And you would definitely generate some money. Some estimates are as much as $2 billion. So that's a significant revenue source. And it's a significant way to draw back that money from public employees. The danger, of course, is that if you do that, as we have said all along, when you treat people unfairly with taxes, they can leave the state and then you get access to that money, and you'll have some attrition there. So that's an interesting idea. The other point that I think will happen to come back to solutions is I think you're going to see a reduction in headcount all across government. Every government entity, state and local, is now going to be incentivized to never hire another worker, to never replace a worker who retires or moves on to another job in the private sector, and to find ways to outsource every single service possible. Because the moment you commit, according to the Supreme Court, to hiring a worker, you now have a 60-year relationship with that worker. 30 years when they theoretically work for you, and then 30 years when you have to pay them once they're retired. And to give you some perspective on that, just let's take teachers alone. The average teacher who works 30 years starts out with a retirement of about $67,000. They get their compounding COLA. After about 10 years, they make more than they made in their final year of work. They will get about $2.6 million back over the course of their retirement, and they will have certainly put in and contributed a total of about $133,000. The difference between that $133,000 and $2.6 million is made up by investment returns, which is not most of it, and taxpayers. That is an immoral contract with the taxpayers. It's just unfair.
John Tillman with us for another minute. It's Riley and Scott on Double. Go ahead, John.
Not the teacher's fault. I want to reemphasize that. This is not the teacher's fault. This is the politician's fault, but it does create an immoral contract between taxpayers and the people who benefit from systems like that.
I want to ask quickly about John Cullerton's plan. He's saying he's tweaking it a bit, but this is a plan that was not even voted on the House or in the House last time. There's a lot of media members who are saying, well, here's the way forward, the Cullerton plan. The savings is so minimal on the Cullerton plan. We've increased our pension pension debt by about $40 billion over the past 5 years, and the Cullerton plan might save $40 billion over the next 30 years. Plus, if you saw the Tribune story, John Cullerton, Senate President, says his plan could save the state $1 billion a year, which then could be spent elsewhere. What is he talking about?
Right. Talk about delusional. It always amazes me, the mindset of the people in that building. There must be something in the water down in Springfield. It's very strange. Here's another little tidbit. First of all, the Cullerton plan is interesting in that he's trying to structure something where there is a benefit received, and so that you're getting a benefit in return, and that it's supposedly where there's a give and take. That supposedly would pass constitutional muster. I think that's a very interesting idea that should be explored. The specific proposal he's put forward is an utter failure to the degree of the problem we have. One other thing I know you've got only a few seconds left. Here's an important thing for people to understand. The state taxpayers have put in $16 billion more than what the original 1995 Edgar Ramp called for. So while the state did miss some pension payments in the interim because the amount paid each year is reset, and about 40% of this problem is because of missed pension payments, it shows how structurally unsound this whole system is, because the taxpayers put in $16 billion more than was originally anticipated, and we're not even close to being fully funded. That's why we should be converting everybody to 401k, and that is the ultimate solution.
He's the CEO of Illinois Policy, John Tillman. As always, John, we appreciate you taking time out of your day for us.
Thanks so much for having me, and have a great weekend, everybody.